Right then, hello. So this is going to be a workshop on doing street outreach on Muslims, people who are Islamic. Um, I think this is a really important topic for people to educate themselves on, um, because I think, unfortunately, when you are debating people about veganism who are religious, the default position that activists take is to sort of deny their religion. Um, and to almost sort of try and make them an atheist instead of making them vegan. And while that might, you know, be an approach that might work in the long run, I think it I think it takes longer and it is harder to make people atheists than it is to make them vegan Muslims. And I think Islam is one of the easier Englishes, the easier religions to actually debate when it comes to veganism, because a lot of um, elements of Islam are sort of baked in animal consideration. Um, so anyway, I'll go through my talking points, and I'll go through the order I think you should deliver them in if you're going to have a debate with an Islamic person about veganism. Um, and obviously this isn't the only way to do it, but I think this is a way that's worked for me quite well, and I think it's a pretty good way of doing it. Um, Obviously, disclaimer, the majority of conversations you ever have about veganism are not going to go um, exactly as you would like them. Um, Having talks with Islamic people is just the same. You know, these arguments won't work on everybody, but I think if you actually you meet a person who is a Muslim, a good faith Muslim, they're actively trying to sort of follow their religion um, to be a good person. I think this is probably one of the best ways to go about it. So anyway, um, yeah, let's jump into it. So the first step of any vegan debate, in my opinion, um, is that you should always get them to agree with you that we don't need to consume animal products. Um, we choose to consume animal products or choose not to consume animal products. I think that is just the place I always begin at, because it means you don't have to argue about health. Um, so that is the first position as usual. But then we sort of go in a different path if you become aware that this person is Islamic, that their religion is the main sort of paradigm which they organize their sort of life around, their sort of moral structure with which they sort of use to make decisions. um, then I think it's really important to sort of swap tacks and um, talk about that instead. So the first point I always make after that one, when speaking to Islamic people, is I get them to concede that when the Quran was written, the Quran is the sort of the word of God that was written into a single holy book that's never been altered. So I get them to concede that when the Quran was written, people needed to consume animals to survive. They weren't choosing to, because they lived in a time before sort of all year farming, before refrigeration, um, before sort of like globalization. So the only way to survive through sort of harsh winters um, was to have animals and to eat animals. And if you can get them to concede that point at the very beginning, which most people will do that, most Islamic people I've spoken to are happy to concede that point, um, it then becomes very easy to discuss their religion um, in a sort of more honest way, because a lot of people, when you are speaking to them about Islam, they will say it doesn't say in the Quran that I can't kill animals, and if it doesn't say I can't, then surely I can. But if you can get them to concede that it was written when they had to, then you can get them to admit that it couldn't say that. It would not be possible for the Quran to say you can't kill animals, otherwise it would be condemning the followers of the book of the Quran to death, right? Because they would literally die, because they wouldn't be able to survive without animal products. So once you've got them to accept that point, you can then have a discussion about the Quran in sort of relation to modern times, right? If they've conceded we don't, when it was made, we had to eat animal products, But now we live in a world where we don't have to eat animal products. You can then actually discuss whether or not a Quran that was written in the time we live in would say, just don't eat animals. And that's kind of what I talk about. So I'll say, look, um, talking point number 2 is uh, the Quran clearly lays out how to kill animals in a kind, compassionate, and considerate way, right? To give them respect, to try and minimize their pain and their fear and their suffering, right? So the Quran clearly is aware that these animals can suffer, they can fear, and they can, you know, they deserve respect, right? And if we now live in a time where we don't have to eat them, the most respect we could give them is to not do that, right? And clearly, if the Quran has gone out of its way to sort of outline the way that we should, when we had to kill these animals, shows that they are worthy enough of respect that their treatment is mandated by God. The Quran mandates how we should treat them, so they are that worthy of respect that if you don't treat them in the way that the Quran has mandated, you won't get into heaven, right? Because that's why the rules are there. Eating things that are haram means you're less likely to go to heaven, right? That's how it works. So killing these creatures in a way that is not kind is not good. Um, and if they sort of agree with you on this, you can go further. And I should probably make the point at this. I should probably state my point at this point is that whilst you're having this discussion, if at any time you can when you're speaking to someone who is religious, especially if you don't look like them, if you look like a fucking white trans girl, for example, it's important to demonstrate your understanding of their religion. It's important to demonstrate that you understand, what halal is. It's important that you understand what the Quran is. It's important you understand what the Hadith is. The Hadith, by the way, so the Quran is the word of God, and the Hadith is sort of stories and sort of sayings of Muhammad, the Prophet, and they're the two things that are sort of the main principles of Islam, is the Hadith and the Quran. So it's important that you can demonstrate that you understand these things so that they respect you enough to speak about sort of, how they live their life, right? Because we all know as vegans that if we're talking about something, moral and ethical, we're more likely to listen to vegans, right? Because we know that they understand how we organize our life, the moral sort of ethical construct that we organize our life around. And it's the same with religious people. They are more likely to listen to someone who can demonstrate an understanding of their religion. So the next part is about that. So talking point 3 is basically sort of demonstrating an understanding of their religion. So you can talk about the Hadith, and you can bring up the story in the Hadith about a prostitute. This prostitute gives it's either food or water to an animal. It changes quite a bit, different interpretations, different writings. But usually, if you're a little bit unsure, it's quite good because they will pick up on it, right? And they'll be like, "Yeah, I know this one. I know this one." Right? And sometimes you can start the story and they can finish it, which is quite good because that's a really good way of sort of building a bond with someone. If you sort of communally build the story together, they're more likely to sort of exchange information and views with you. But anyway, as you will. So you tell them about the story about the prostitute who gives water to the cat or water to the dog. And this prostitute was a woman of low virtue in the Hadith. So she probably wasn't going to go to heaven because she's a woman of low virtue. She's not committed any major sins, but prostitution is a sin in the Quran. So anyway, this prostitute isn't going to go to heaven, but because she feeds a dog or a cat that would otherwise have died, she is allowed into heaven. And this is great because this shows that consideration for animals and going out of your way to minimize animal suffering is valuable enough in the eyes of God to change whether or not you get into heaven, right? To change whether or not you get into paradise. Which means, once again, it is, they deserve consideration, right? If they deserve enough consideration that it changes whether or not you're going to get into heaven, it must be important, right? The looking after animals must be important. And thankfully enough, there's a sister story or a brother story that goes along with this in the Hadith, and that is about a woman of high virtue. And this woman of high virtue, who is probably going to get into heaven because she's done all the right things, lady of high virtue, owns an animal, owns a dog, one dog, and she does not feed that dog. She is too selfish to feed that dog. Because she doesn't feed the dog dies. Um, and because the dog dies, she does not get into heaven. So this is also a good story because this shows it doesn't matter how virtuous you are. If you are cruel to an animal, one animal, you will not go to heaven. And at this point, you can say some heavy-handed things like, how can you expect to go to heaven? Or I'd do it the way around, actually. I'd say, if this one virtuous woman who was cruel to one animal didn't get into heaven, then how can you, who knowingly pays for the awful conditions of animals that we don't need to eat, and eats them, right, for no purpose, for no need, how can you expect to go to heaven? If you pay for the abuse of animals 3 times a day, how can you expect to go to heaven when she only abused one animal? Now, I think that's a pretty powerful statement, um, and those are the main talking points, right? I think if you have them down, there are sort of other ways that conversations will go. Sometimes they will go into sort of like permissibility. And there are some really esoteric arguments about how the Quran was actually written for all periods. But I wouldn't really bother with them. I think those arguments are brought up by people who aren't trying to have a good faith argument with you. I'd know the basics, and just be good at them, and hope that the person you're talking to is a good faith Muslim who is genuinely sort of trying to live a good life. And then there's sort of one more story that's quite useful because this is quite a common one that's brought up by Muslims. And I used to do a different approach to combat it. I used to say, so the thing that they bring up quite often is Eid. There's 2 different types of Eid. One of them mandates some sort of sacrifice to be shared with the family. And usually the way I deal with this is I say, are you aware of the original story? Are you aware why Eid happened? Like the original sort of story about Abraham, basically. And some people won't know it, which is quite funny actually. They'll just know that younger Muslims often won't know it. But it's quite a good one if you do know it, because once again you can sort of prove your knowledge of their religion. So the story of Abraham is the same in all 3 Abrahamic faiths, as in the Quran. And it's basically a story about a guy who was asked by God to demonstrate that he was a good follower of God, to demonstrate that he was a good disciple of God, right? And in most faiths, God is good, right? God is the embodiment of good. So if you are a good disciple of God, then you are a good person, right? So if God tells you to do something, doing that thing shows you are good. So Allah was basically saying to Abraham, excuse me, holy hell. Allah was saying to Allah was saying to Abraham, kill your son and demonstrate that you're a good follower. And Abraham says, no, I won't do it. No, I won't do it. And Allah says, no, you have to do this. If you don't do this, you are not a good follower. You'll be, unfaithful to me, and that's not good. So Abraham says, okay, I will kill my son. I'll do it to prove to you that I trust you and I'm a faithful follower. And at the last minute, Allah says, okay, you don't have to kill your son. Kill this goat instead, as like a reward for showing that you've passed this test. And feed your family, share it with your family. And the reason they were killing a goat isn't anything to do with, sacrificing anything. It's because he passed the test. And, in the time that this story happened, a goat was food. You know, that's how you fed your family. You killed a goat and you had a big meal. You celebrated, right? God was literally saying, "Well done, passing the test. Now go and enjoy a nice meal with all your family because you're a good person," right? Which is, context. Back then, they didn't have farming and they didn't have all year round farming. They didn't have globalization. They didn't have refrigeration. So animals were food at the time. So the idea being is that the killing of the goat has nothing really to do with it. Um, but the key principle here, though, after you explain this story, is the whole point of Eid is to demonstrate selflessness, right? To sort of, to share and to give and to sort of, you know be selfless, right? But if you're using Eid, right, as a way to um, justify the abuse that we do to animals, right? If you're using Eid as like as a way to sort of vindicate killing animals we don't need to kill, so that we can enjoy the taste of their flesh, then that's gluttonous. That's selfish, which is the entire opposite meaning of Eid, right? So that's corrupting the story of Abraham. That's corrupting the entire message of Eid, and instead of being selfless, being selfish. Um, I think that's a pretty powerful point if you can express that to them. It's very hard to sort of combat that, I think, because like, you know, that is what they're doing, right? And I've had people admit to me that they appreciate it. That is what they're doing. They're trying to justify the thing they want to do with their religion instead of actually following their religion to work out what they should do, right? Following it to decide, like, if you use your religion to work out what is a good thing to do, then you'll come to the conclusion of veganism. But if you try and use your religion to justify not being vegan, are you even religious? Or are you just a rules lawyer? But anyway, um, but I think my point is I think these are all the points that you need if you have a good faith um, person in front of you who just wants to know like what veganism is within the sort of moral structure of their religion. I think that's a pretty easy way to give it to them. Um, Basically, four easy points. The first one being, oh, where's my hand? The first one is when the Quran was written, we had to eat animals. We didn't choose to. The second one is, halal slaughter clearly indicates that there is consideration for animals in the Quran. The two stories in the Hadith further indicate that such consideration is so important that it will decide whether or not you get into heaven. And then if they really want to bring up Eid, you can discuss Eid. But that's it. Thank you for listening. I think we have questions and answers. Small point. I've filmed this twice. The first time I filmed it, I accidentally left music on before turning it off. So the question and answer is I'm going to be wearing a completely different outfit. But just pretend I'm not. Just pretend. Anyway. Bye. I don't have anything to add. Did I miss anything? Yurdos, do you have any extra pointers?
No, not really. I mean, I think it's a very powerful point to ask, like, hey, like, how do you expect to get in heaven if, like, according to the standards of your religion, if you look at what the Prophet said in Hadith, like, basically saving an animal gets you, forgiven for your sins. Meanwhile, you can go to hell for mistreating animals knowingly, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if this one is more confrontational, but sometimes, like, I want to ask people, like, like if you're on the day of judgment and God asks you, like, why did you continue to harm animals uh knowingly when you knew you could do it, you could not do that, when you knew there were options, when they literally, you know made sure that you had vegans on your path that would inform you of all of this, and you knew about my hadith, about the hadith from the prophet, that just saving one animal was like such a great thing that even a sinner such as a prostitute could go to heaven. Why did you continue? Why did you try to make excuses instead?
Mm-hmm.
Why would be your counter argument to that? Like, what could you possibly say to defend yourself?
I'd to know. I
I
think
don't know if that's like too confrontational of an approach, but because you're kind of hypothesizing about what God will say and such, and people might think this is blasphemy in a sense. But
mhm.
yep,
I think when I usually get to the end and it still doesn't feel like it's working, I try and leave them with like one last trick I pull out of my hat. Is I say if me and you and the Prophet was stood here watching the screen, Muhammad was stood next to us and we were all three of us watching the screen together. And you said, like, instead of saying how do I stop doing this, you instead tried to justify why you were doing it. What would Muhammad say? And I always say, would Muhammad just say, like, maybe just eat plants, bro? Because, like, if you were stood literally with the prophet of your religion in front of a TV of animals being ground to death, or, like, forcibly impregnated, or, having their throats slit, and instead of saying, like, how do I reduce this suffering, you say, like, how do I justify continue doing this? That is so inherently gluttonous.
yeah, good point.
And then it's like you're not even casting judgment, right? You're asking them what their prophet would say. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, I think those were all very good points. Um, I have a hard time like arguing like this. I guess I have to like formulate it in a way that doesn't make me sound like I'm somehow Muslim or agree with their position.
I think it's
It's
important.
just like,
I think it's important to remember that, like, you don't have to believe their faith
yeah,
to have, because, like, they believe that the Quran is a historical document, right? They think it's a relic that is what God writ down. Well, it's the words of God, in a book form, right? So, like, if you are aware of it and what is written within it, and you have studied it, it's a real thing, right? Like, it's just as real as a graphics card, or I don't know, Shakespeare's sort of workings, right? Like, it's a real book that was written, they believe, by God. So it doesn't matter
there's
whether you
a
believe in it. Believing in it doesn't make it real. Like, they're not like fantasists that believe that by thinking that it's real, it becomes real. They
so
think it's real.
on this very topic. I think you should maybe update us later with a document that actually quotes the specific passages
Mhm.
and gives them like like and the hadiths and like their numbers and exactly because like if you can actually fucking quote them exactly,
Well, the problem is they
I think that
change a lot. Like, so there's the one about the prostitute is from the book of Miscellany, um, and there's like a bunch of different translations for it. Um, I actually couldn't find the one about the 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 lady of high virtue who doesn't feed the animal and goes to hell. But I've had so many conversations with people on the street where I've brought it up and they've known the story that I know it does exist, right? Because it can't just be in the complete zeitgeist of, like, 100 Muslims and not exist, right? So, but I couldn't find it. Um,
yeah, but my point is, do you think there's a when it comes to your legitimacy as a person, right? Like, do you think that being able to quote the exact passage gives you a bit more ethos?
I think to some extent,
Yeah, that could be
beginning
worth.
to talk about the story and letting them finish it actually gives it more credence, because then you're letting them quote it, right?
That's also a good point. Yeah, like ask them if they know about it and let them explain, and then you can like both like go over it.
Yeah. I always ask
Plus,
them
like,
if they
plus you
know the
don't seem as
story.
arrogant.
Yeah, I always ask them if they know the story, and then if they want, they can tell me it, right?
Plus you make it more. You engage them more in the conversation, right? Like it's instead of just engaging them in a conversation just with like questions in the Socratic method, you're actually engaging them when it comes to recollecting information that they are supposed to know.
Yeah, we're literally having like a
You
sort of
look,
God.
yeah, and you're looking less arrogant. Like you're not just like telling the whole thing. You're like, yeah, you probably know about it.
Yeah, I'm not like explaining their religion to them.
So
I'm telling them the bits of their religion I know, and then I'm letting them explain them to me, so they
yep.
know I've not misunderstood them, right?
Yep.
which I think comes off really genuine, and it really strips away this idea that like I'm this white person trying to explain their religion to them, right? It's like,
Yep. That's all I had to say.
but I think the main points that I would sort of stress is that you shouldn't feel like you're an imposter, right? If you've spent the time to actually learn enough about their religion as to which bits like point towards veganism, you've put a bit of effort into learning their religion, right? So you're not an imposter. You're not just sort of like
Yeah,
pretending
it's like
to know about their religion.
I, I guess you should approach the conversation from for the sake of the conversation, like let's grant that yes, like Islam is correct and everything. Like I can still prove you that it's inconsistent for you to not be vegan.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like I'm not personally Muslim, but even if Islam happened to be true, I think there's very strong evidence for why one should abstain from unnecessary animal exploitation, given what we actually find in Islam.
Hmm.
And here's the information.
Yeah.
And so, like, you believe this is real. You believe like heaven and hell are a thing. How can you possibly expect to end up in heaven given the information we just overviewed?
Hmm.
If you continue to make excuses to support animal abuse instead of deciding
Wait,
to
I
stop supporting it.
in terms of Islam, the biggest positive, especially activism I have from them, it's whenever I personally ask them, what would your God be okay with, right?
Hmm.
I just go based on what they personally believe their God is, because they know that they have to agree based on the simple fact of religion. Their God has to be all benevolent, so all loving, right?
Yep.
And based on that simple factor, you can definitely show them that would a all loving God be okay with unnecessary suffering? And they would have to say no, have to, because otherwise they will just claim that they have a completely different view on what their personal God is, and that would go against the Islamic religion, because the Islamic religion is against unnecessary harm, even to animals.
Yeah. Which I think is why it's really, really important to open the gate with clarifying that when the Quran was written, you had to kill animals. I think that's the step. If you miss that step, everything falls to pieces.
Sure. And even Muslim people can agree right now. It's like consuming to a certain degree, because I had some discussions with people that they personally thought like to some degree you had to or something, but you can easily like debunk that with certain arguments, and usually, as I told Jess before, usually I really like to use the plate argument. You have two plates. plate a Plate A is already vegan, it's plant-based, and it's nutritionally adequate, but plate B has a knife where if you choose a knife you have to slaughter an animal, but you don't have to slaughter if you choose plate A. So choosing plate B would be unnecessary suffering or unnecessary violence,
Hmm. And both
which usually, yeah,
both is
makes people think.
nutritionally complete, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or you can say they have the same nutrition or whatever. It doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
You can even make a statement that, let's say, plate A tastes 50% less as good as plate B, but it would still be unnecessary harm. Or even worse, it would be gluttony, which is a sin.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 I think gluttony is the big one. Like that is basically the whole root of the argument, right? If it's unnecessary, it's gluttonous.
Yeah. There is quickly find it. So a really good definition, well, not really good definition, a definition on Google, which I checked just to double check what gluttony means, is gluttony is a form of greed, and it worships food as means to satisfy the inner craving of the soul,
Okay.
which is a really interesting one, because it also uses the word soul.
I mean, I think most people, like, if you say the word gluttony on the street while having a religious debate, I think they know sort of
Yeah, yeah,
what you mean, right?
God is jealous of delicious food because you're paying attention to food and not God.
yeah. But no, I think that's a really good conversation starter without even going into religion. Would you just a simple question is like, is your God okay with gluttony? And would eating animals over plants be gluttonous? And voila, you know,
Yeah, right.
that's already a speed run. Yeah.
But I think sometimes the problem is that like people don't care whether their God is logically consistent. They just care that
What?
like yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think sometimes giving people logical consistency as a reason to do something doesn't sometimes work for me. Like I'll have
Yeah.
people like quote
Could you give an example?
so like I'll say I don't know actually. I sometimes I've had debates with sort of Christians and I've said
Yeah.
like why is kindness such a big thing within your religion,
Hmm.
right? And compassion and caring and sort of like
Mhm.
looking after your neighbor and treating your neighbor the way you'd like to be treated. But then we don't give the same consideration to animals. And
That would
Yeah.
be have. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
and there is no moral consistency. They just don't believe it. They just they take the verse that says they can kill animals and they're completely okay with that.
I would say people who ignore it are just willing to just be ignorant about it. They're like, for them to be educated on it would mean that they will have to go vegan. But sometimes they just prefer to be ignorant and not to listen to, you know.
I think the
Can
fact
I
that
interrupt with something?
of
Mhm.
course you can. It's not
Sure.
interrupting.
Unrelated, but right now I'm cleaning the fridge
Oh,
and because I'm
maybe
moving all
maybe
of
no
the.
then. Maybe no
Yeah.
then.
Okay.
But no, yeah, in terms of Christians who are like I would say that there are definitely religious people who are willingly are ignorant because they know if they won't be ignorant, then they will have to stop consuming, you know, animal products.
I think that's why like having debates with Muslims
Hmm.
is so easy because like it's baked into Islam that everyone is aware of like halal
Yeah.
food. So it's like it's really easy to get them to extend that consideration beyond just the method of killing. Whereas in
But what if,
God,
this is a
But I
question, what if
mean, like,
someone, what if,
halal isn't halal, right? Like, there's been many studies that show, like,
no,
yeah,
don't worry
what.
about it. Don't worry about it.
that's a different, yeah. But I think like, what about people who are like, who say they're open-minded, like in terms of religion, but they are purposely being like ignorant about it?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What if, okay, what if the religious people are being like, they don't know that they're being ignorant about it, but they're purposely being ignorant?
Oh, you mean
Uh,
as in they're avoiding learning about it so that they can say
yeah,
they don't know it's wrong?
no, it's more like it's not like avoiding it. It's just um, I'll try to find better words, but I did have other people say that they should never question religion,
Mhm.
which is a really interesting thing. Some Muslims tell me, like, you should never like question religion, stuff like that.
Well,
So that,
I would tell them that I'm not questioning their religion, and that's the whole point.
yeah.
Is if you build it inside their religion, you're not at
Hmm.
any point questioning their religion, right?
Well,
Yeah, you're questioning them, and if
Right.
they're, are you questioning your religion? Actually, basically,
The only thing that I get them to accept that is outside of their own religious texts is that when the Quran was written, you
yeah.
had to eat meat to survive, and most people I've spoken to will accept that really early on in the conversation, and that's the only thing I'm asking them to accept
Yeah.
that isn't specifically written in the Quran.
Mm. But then would it be a good tactic to ask him about gluttony right after, if eating meat is gluttony?
No, because I think it's really important to prove that you actually know their religion enough for them to consider your opinion. I think it's
Okay.
really important talking about Islam just so they know you're aware of what their
Hmm.
religion is, so that they're more likely to listen to you.
Okay, interesting.
Right? Because if you have like a 5 minute conversation where you say like, "Oh, are you aware of this bit in the Quran? And are you aware about this hadith? Are you aware about this hadith?"
Yeah.
Then they're like, "Oh, you know my religion. Like, it's a safe place to talk to you because I don't have to just assume ignorance, right? I can now assume that you
Mm.
actually are aware of the thing that I base my life around.
Yeah.
So to some extent, talking about their religion is like building a safe space.
Yeah. But I do have different experiences where I tell them that I know about their religion, because I like to talk and ask people different opinions about it. But mostly I'm interested in like certain, especially animal rights in terms of Islam, and usually like that kind of skips a few things here and there.
Yeah, right. Which is, I think, part of the reason it's successful for me is because I don't skip, and because
Yeah.
I don't stray out of Islam. I stay within Islam.
Yeah.
And because I have an open conversation with them about their religion, instead of just trying to push my ethics on them completely outside of their own moral framework.
Now, I wanted to extrapolate this to like Christianity.
Okay.
So, when you talk to a Christian, typically what you'll get is, even if you like try to relate to their religion, they'll say something like, "Oh well, the Bible says that the only way to go to heaven is through Jesus Christ." So basically, they're saying that like nothing else matter, like deeds don't matter.
Mhm.
And to that, really, the only thing I can say to them is like, and it has had some success, that while it will never.
Why do you
bring
care about being a good person to anyone then?
Well,
But then you're
it's
leaving
beyond.
religion, right? The whole
Yeah,
point is to stay within
you're
religion.
leaving the Christianity. Like, what you can say is, and this is like not a very strong vegan position, but it's like I think it relates to their religion. Is you can say, while it's not necessary for salvation to be vegan, it brings you closer to God, because God clearly wants us to show compassion to other beings, and it specifically says in the Bible that animals have spirits. It says that they can suffer. I believe in Ezekiel. I don't remember the specific verse off the top of my head, but yeah, all that's to say is like it feels weird saying that like you can't reach salvation through veganism, because it feels like I'm like undermining the importance of veganism, but it's really demonstrating that you understand that the only way to salvation is through Jesus Christ, which shows them that you understand their religion.
Which is still a morally disgusting position. Like, Jeffrey Dahmer like said, "Oh yeah, I converted to Christianity before he died. So according to this logic, he's in heaven."
Oh yeah, it's a very it's ironic, because it's often seen as like that Christianity like makes people good, but really it gives them an excuse to behave awfully and just like ask for forgiveness, and then you're all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think
I mean, doesn't that happen with all religion?
Not necessarily. No. I mean, the point is that like you're accountable to God and not mainly to the person you actually harm, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, you're accountable to God, and you're not even accountable to God anymore if you like
Yeah.
believe in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but I think I don't know. I don't know the argument within Christianity, but I think there must be arguments within Christianity that make it easier to make vegans through Christianity
I
than
mean,
trying
in
to
Genesis 4,
make atheists, right?
I mean, in Genesis 4, you had like the children of Adam and Eve, right? Like Cain and Abel, making sacrifices to God, and God preferred the one who was killing newborn animals over the guy giving crops from his farm. He thought the baby animal corpses were a better sacrifice. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's just.
Yeah, it does say that God likes the smell of burning flesh.
And this is why we're doing Islam talking points, guys, because Christianity is fucking hard.
Yeah.
You can basically, if they were to say like, "Oh, this verse says that God likes the smell of burning flesh," I would have nothing to say. Like, I always hope that they never bring that up. Um, Alternatively, I guess what you could say with to the Christian is like, well, Jesus was the end of animal sacrifice, and like I said, God clearly wants us to show compassion to other beings, and it does say they have spirits. So, you know, you want to be closer to God, be vegan.
I have a question, which kind of relates to this. What's the most difficult questions for you guys that come from religious individuals? Because for me, because I'm not sure how to exactly approach this. Maybe Jesse can add this. How do you feel? How do you guys feel the appeal to
No true Scotsman.
no true Scotsman? Yeah.
What's that?
No true Scotsman is basically saying
It's a fallacy.
in the best way possible purity check how pure you are in terms to the beliefs that I have. If you're not Muslim, then I cannot trust you because you're not Muslim.
Or isn't it also like you're not really Christian unless you blah blah blah?
Yeah, unless you follow the faith, you're not really Christian.
Wait, are you saying that Muslims might express distrust of you because you're not Muslim?
No, it's more like that the message I'm portraying is from someone who's not Muslim. So therefore,
Yeah, but you're not pretending to be Muslim. Like
Yeah.
they're not
No,
making
no.
a fallacy by saying, "Oh, yeah, Felix is not a real Muslim because."
But it's more like the kind of message I'm trying to give them is like, hey, we shouldn't exploit animals, blah blah. But the person usually says, well, I don't want to talk to you because you don't follow my faith or something.
Right.
Well,
you know.
you can't really have a conversation with someone who doesn't want to talk to you.
But
It's straight. It's not your fault. Like
yeah, but you can. That's like literally my talking points is you can, right? Like that is the whole reason that you begin by literally talking about their faith. Right? Because the reason that people might not want to speak to you in the street, Felix, is because if you come up and you go, I want to talk to you about animal rights, and they go, oh, I'm, Islam, and you go, I don't care about Islam, I want to talk to you about my animal rights, they probably wouldn't want to talk to you, In the same way that if I came up to you in the street and said, like, hey, I need you to, I don't know, sign up to this like eco charity so we can reduce plastic waste, and you'd be like, are you vegan? I'm like, no, I'm not vegan, I don't care about veganism, I want you to sign up to my green eco thing. You wouldn't give a hell, right? You would be like, no thank you, I'm gonna go listen to the vegan person over there.
I would actually make a deal with them, like, okay, so like there's a bunch of evidence that going vegan is actually good for the environment, so if you go vegan I will actually like help you out with your thing.
But that's my point, is you're more willing to take ideas about your own morality from people who share your morality, right? Or at least understand your morality. So it's like the talking points to some extent are less important than actually presenting Islamic talking points and be willing to sort of engage in a Islamic discussion, because I've definitely had conversations with people prior to understanding Islamic talking points where I didn't use any of them, and they were literally unwilling to talk to me because I knew nothing about their faith. So why would they listen to me? Right? Like 50% of activism is getting the other person to like you. The other 50% is getting the other person to agree with you. But if they don't like you, they will never agree with you.
Yeah, that's so true. Jess, I think that'd be a good change my mind would be like, Allah wants you to be vegan, change my mind.
Oh, kind of based.
Yeah.
Kind of based.
I'd maybe go with Muhammad though.
Or Muhammad, yeah. I would, if I were to do something like that, I would have to like do a lot of like work, but I would do like, Jesus wants you to be vegan, change my mind.
You don't need it doesn't need to be Muhammad, or like you can say it's Allah, because like if Muhammad is making a claim about someone for being forgiven for anything, he's the prophet of God. Like he knows what he's making that claim. It's because it's true that God actually did that. So it's actually reflective on God's mindset and opinion.
True. I mean,
so you can say Muhammad.
I regretted saying I'd probably make Muhammad the moment I said it. I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see.
Way. Also,
That's,
I just want you guys to know that I may or may not have been listening to music over my headphones when I was doing my speech. So I might have to just re-record everything I said. That's totally okay. I turned it off while we were doing the questions, but it's totally we're great. We're great at this.
Are you posting this on the YouTube?
I think I'll put it on YouTube, yeah, because I think it is good for activism, and that's the whole point of the YouTube. So, yeah. But if anyone,
like if you ask YouTube why they made the platform, they're gonna say, "Oh, we made it for activism."
Right?
Yeah, exactly that.
Specifically for vegan activism.
I
Go on,
just
Philip.
quickly want to say just something unrelated. Why does a can of Coke have the same amount of calories as a half a bag of rice? That's crazy. Anyway,
Oh,
I actually wanna. I'm interested. Wait, what's the name? Eurydos. What is one thing that you really dislike in terms of like talking points with religious people? Which talking point from a religious person you really don't like in terms of ethics, animal ethics?
I think the whole like, oh, but we've been made in the image of God thing is really fucking cringe. I think people who will straight up deny that we are animals biologically is also really fucking cringe. But that's my little sensitivity as a biologist, you know. So
my Nana once said that animals don't have providence, so that's why we can do whatever we want to them.
animals don't have what?
Providence. I had to look that word up because I was like, what the hell does that mean?
Okay, what did she mean by that?
I guess you meant like they're not made in the image of God. So, like,
Yeah. Okay.
that's what she said. She said, like, I have providence, animals don't. So, what we do to them is not like discrimination or anything.
So first of all, you do have a. Wait, I mean that literally justifies any form of animal abuse. First of all, so that's fucked up. Secondly, there's a passage in Ecclesiastes you can actually quote against that. Like it's there. I'm just saying.
Doesn't that also mean that to some extent women aren't made in God's image though? Because they're made from a rib from Adam, right?
No, but they come from Adam, who was made in God's image. So like indirectly,
Nope.
it's, you know.
But
That sounds
surely
funny.
Adam is in God's image, but missing a rib, right?
Well, women also apparently can't embody the full spirit of God.
Yeah.
And also, they're not supposed to teach men, as you know, because like it's they are to remain silent instead.
Yep, they're the servants
Oh.
of men.
I love the Bible.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I have a question actually.
What's
Yeah.
up?
Would anyone like to do one of these on Christianity?
I would like to do it on
It feels
Christianity.
like same talking.
Probably me. I don't know.
Way.
I have a
We could collaborate. You know.
Yes. I
You
would
probably
love
do
that.
have Christian vegans on this Discord, and you can probably ask them about some points.
I'm not specifically interested in. I want talking points that work, right? So I want people who have used these talking points on Christians in the street, and those Christians have gone vegan, because that's what I care about. I don't, you know, I just want
Sure.
good faith arguments that work on people who are Christian that I can replicate and use. I would, if someone feels comfortable doing that, I would love that. That would make my day.
Imagine worshiping
So
a god that preferred the guy who killed baby animals
If I can
yeah,
get good
and being
enough,
vegan.
if I can get good enough arguments, I'll do a street activism version of it.
I would love that. And if anyone knows any sort of Christian street activists who are willing to do a little presentation, that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know any, but I would love if someone were to find one. Oh, I know. I actually do know one, but he's kind of a dumbass.
Surprising.
He's
oh,
his name's Carefree Traveler.
Ah.
He actually did really good Christian activism, but he's also like homophobic and transphobic. So
I mean, to some extent, I don't care. Like, I wouldn't be giving them a platform. I just want their Christian views.
They do have
I
they
probably
hold their
can't.
positions really well, to be honest.
Yeah, Felk, you should reach out to Carefree and see if, because I don't know. I don't think I could at this point. I've insulted his religion a lot, and his like
Why
homophobic.
are we talking about Carefree? Carefree is
We're
like
talking about religion, by the way.
Yeah.
okay, but I mean, yeah, but Carefree is not worth talking about. They're not vegan. They won't be. They're hardly plant-based. In fact,
They
yeah,
have their arguments for veganism within the Christian faith
religion-based. Yeah.
are pretty strong. I'll give them that.
I mean, it's not tough to be. It's not tough to not be vegan and have strong arguments against veganism.
Yeah, but
No.
we're just looking for
Nick's saying the
effectiveness. We're not.
strong arguments for veganism, I think,
Yeah,
even though they're not vegan.
He has
Oh yeah, yeah.
good. Very
Yeah.
like he went into a room of like really hardcore fundamentalists, like Like these are people that think that feminism is like a
Right.
threat in the world. Like
Wait, that's the thing you're saying about fundamentalists to show how bonkers they're. Can we talk about the fact that they deny straight up that we share a common ancestor with chimpanzees? Can we actually start with that?
Well,
That's a different. I wanna keep it to Jesse's
hold
argument
on,
for now.
hold on. I want to explain why Carefree is a good activist in the Christian sphere. He went into like a room with like people like this, like 10 people like this, and they were super. He had a rebuttal for everything. Like they were like super resistant at first, and then by the end they're like, "Well, fuck." Like, I guess the best I can do is say that veganism is like actually a compassionate position. Like, because at the beginning they were like, veganism is like fucking cancer. It's like anti-God or whatever. By the end, they were actually like convinced, but they were also like, I'm not gonna do it because I have autism or something like that, or like. So
Oh my god, I'm autistic and I'm vegan. That's a cop out.
Yeah,
Bullshit.
well, it might be in in most cases. Yeah, it might be in most cases. But my point being, like, he's homophobic, he's transphobic, but his Christian activism is powerful.
But no, yeah, his view on like people, trans and gays is just like it's a sin, right? It's nothing more than that. He still like
That's
respects
homophobic.
people for what they live.
Yeah,
It's
it's just a thing that the creator of the universe and the ultimate authority of morality looks down upon. You know, that's chill.
It's transphobic. It is transphobic and homophobic to call it a sin. You're saying there's something wrong with you.